The American soldier held in captivity for 5 years by the Taliban is back in the U.S. Military officials just held a news conference to discuss the third phase of Bo Bergdahl's reintegration.
Sergeant Bergdahl is in stable condition and will work daily with medical and mental health professionals. He appeared just like any sergeant would when they see a two-star general, a little bit nervous, but he looked good and again saluted and had good deportment.
Defense sources tell Fox Bergdahl says he was locked up in solitary confinement for 2 straight years, and he didn't see another human face for that entire time. So what should happen once Bergdahl's condition improves? Well, his platoon mates are confident he deserted his post before ending up in the hands of the Taliban. Here's what they think.
Raise your hand if you would like to see him court-martialed and see a trial. Wow.
Seems to be unanimous consensus among those people that were seeing what was going on in real time. You decide. You want to take their word for it, or the administration, Eric, saying, hey, listen, these guys are having something against them, trying to show some kind of disparity, saying that this isn't consistent with the facts that they know.
Well, Brett Baer sent that email, and I think we've reported that Bergdahl spent some time in solitary, didn't see faces in a box, and that may change some of the way people feel about what went on and how urgent it was to get Bergdahl back in the timing on it. However, it doesn't change the fact that if he did in fact purposefully and knowledgeably walk away from his platoon mates, as they pointed out, they were willing to die for him. He apparently wasn't willing to die for them. Then he deserves to be court-martialed. Remember, you can be found innocent in a court-martial. It's a trial, right? We find out what actually happened. I'd like to see these guys testify under oath, but I have a hunch that at this point, what we're 10, 12 days in now, someone would have come forth and said, "Look, I agree with Bergdahl. I didn't see him walk away," but no one's willing to do that. So I think it's high time that he gets his day in court.
Right now, these are the facts as we know it, and that's why they have to have a fact-finding vehicle to go through this, to let him present his side. That's what's fair, because he has a story to tell. We have to give him the opportunity to do that. But what we know thus far, Andrea, is inconsistent with what we're hearing from the administration.
Yeah, and I think there's another question, too. If he had been kept in solitary confinement and only was brought out with a bag over his head, is he fit to stand trial? I mean, I definitely think we have some answers, but I'm not sure of his mental health. I'm not a medical professional, but I cannot imagine that 2 years in solitary confinement, he might just be gone. I still think we are owed answers of why he was discharged from the U.S. Coast Guard and then moved to the United States Army if he was discharged for psychological reasons. It's such an odd occurrence. So we could have prevented this whole thing in the first place. But I do think he should be examined to see if he can stand trial by medical professionals. I do not see him, though, getting any jail time, no matter what he says or no matter what happens. I do think he will have the protection of this White House regardless.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And Dana, talking about the messaging here and kind of the optics behind the scene, like what kind of message should they be putting out at this point? Because it seems like they're trying to set the table for some kind of mental instability defense, perhaps unable to stand trial in his own defense and prepare a case.
Well, I think that there's two separate entities. I don't think that the military and the White House are necessarily on the same page here.
Okay.
I think it was the White House that made the decision to have the Rose Garden ceremony, which ignited the controversy, and it didn't have to be that way. Separately, I think there's the military, which I think they've handled themselves very well. The care and feeding of the family and now of our soldier that is back, even if he is court-martialed, I think that there's a reason that our military is still holds the public's trust as an institution, because look at how our military conducted themselves today with care, steadiness, calm,
composure,
and just absolutely dignified. And I think that we have a lot to be proud of in that regard.
Okay, Bob, how do you see it?
Well, first of all, let's step back and recognize. This reminds me of the Malaysian airline flight where everybody was speculating. Those guys, what they said is platoon. That is not evidence. I mean, they said he was a deserter. They don't know if he was a deserter. They didn't like the guy, but not one of them could go to the court of law and say, I actually watched him walk over to the bar and get in with the Taliban, one. And two, and also, I'm not going to defend this, but in the first day, the big story was all these people who died tried to find him. Well, that story's disappeared for a good reason. They have not died trying to find him. So I think we have to be very careful here. And I like the military. I mean, I think Dana's right. They handled it very well. But we can't call this guy deserted because 5 guys
We're not
raised their
saying
hand?
that.
There is still testimony from his platoon mates that said that he asked them what would happen if he were to desert.
Well, that's
times.
That's different.
So there's some evidence there. And also, why didn't the military raise a red flag when he sent all of his belongings home? Typically, as I understand it in the military, when you send everything home, you're immediately put on suicide watch because it means you're going to do something. You don't send all of your personal belongings home and then just sit there and do nothing.
He can become a sympathetic character if all these things are true and he was tortured and all that. However, Bob, he did email his parents, and he did leave a journal behind when he left or was taken. And all those arrows point to a deserter,
but
not a guy who was taken.
It shows his state of mind at the time that would be relevant. And then, Bob, just so you know, any of the statements that any of these soldiers are making that would be relevant to the case and a judge will decide can be brought in if they're called to testify and there is an inconsistent, like a prior inconsistent statement, or for the prosecution, one that's consistent. So it is relevant, it is important, and there's a record that's being made.
I've been under an insanity watch for 20 years, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have, that may be the rules.
I don't think that your experiences are comparable. Right.
I think that's probably fair, except that he went to a bar and so did I.
And we've already made a conclusive decision on your statement.
Yes.
This is true. And let's move on to something else that we got to take around the table because big news developments today now to Iraq, a country slipping back into chaos less than 3 years after President Obama pulled out our forces. Key cities are back in control of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, a terror network even worse than that. Iraq is in desperate need of our help, and today the president says it will get some, but not our ground troops.
We will not be sending U.S. troops back into combat in Iraq, but I have asked my national security team to prepare a range of other options that could help support Iraq security forces, and I'll be reviewing those options in the days ahead. We're also going to pursue intensive diplomacy throughout this period, both inside of Iraq and across the region.
All right, Senator John McCain and Army General Jack Keane have advice for the president.
I say to the President of the United States, get a new national security team in place. You have been ill-served by the national security team and the decisions that you have in place now and the decisions that you made.
What needs to be done here is not really rocket science in terms of military operation. I would put General Petraeus on an airplane.
All right, strong advice and words from two very experienced veterans suggesting how the president could better the situation and handle what's going on, which is a quickly disintegrating situation in the Middle East that can compromise U.S. National security interests. I already know around the table we've got some different opinions about how this should be handled. Let's take it around, starting with Andrea.
Well, we should be fracking the heck out of whatever we can in the United States of America and get ourselves off Middle Eastern oil, number one. Number two, I don't think there's a lot of good answers here. I mean, I've heard talk about airstrikes and bombing, but in order to conduct an effective bombing campaign, you have to have operations on the ground. And we just don't have that. I don't think President Obama is willing to put boots on the ground. I don't think the American people want to put boots on the ground. This has been an epic failure on so many different levels. I mean, Kimberly, he announced numerous times, telegraphed our timetable of when we were pulling out for political reasons. He's ignored the advice of generals and military officials. He doesn't listen to them anyway. They've told him what to do, and he said no, he's gone his own way. Then just last month, when he was at West Point giving an address, he said we've decimated Al-Qaeda on the border. Not true. This past Sunday, Daniel Henninger has an excellent column in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that goes through exactly the sequence of events. They attacked again on the border. More girls in Nigeria were kidnapped. Ukraine. President Obama then releases 5 dangerous terrorists. I mean, you can't think of a worse time for the Middle East to be burning to the ground and them achieving their ultimate goal of a caliphate takes place than on the heels of releasing 5 dangerous terrorists. So as much as people are saying we need to get involved, I'm not so certain that we do.
Well, the president is saying he's going to take the advice and weigh options as to what are the next best steps. So, again, we're saying what we're going to do, giving them some time to get even closer to their objective and their goal. So even if we do act, will it be sufficient? And is there, in fact, enough ground support to be able to make this a successful operation?
Well, you had administration officials on background telling reporters that this situation in Iraq snuck up on them, that they didn't know what was happening. So when John McCain suggests that President Obama ought to fire his national security team, I can understand that. However, in my opinion, it comes from the top. if you want to solve a problem, you have to first admit that you have one. And from the president's statement this morning, I think it sounds like we were going to have a commission, and 6 months later we'll try to figure out something to do. I don't think we have that much time. Perhaps we will decide to do nothing. That's what I think the president was signaling today. However, we just have to admit to ourselves and be honest about the cost of that. And Iran getting involved in order to help, if that's what we're going to be willing to do, then we have to understand the cost. And then I would caution people to look over the weekend at what is going to happen in Jordan. Jordan, one of the most stable partners that we have in the Middle East. They already have over 1.5 million refugees. They're looking at 500,000 more. They will not be able to absorb them. And I think that if we don't do something, that Jordan will be next.
All right, I think that's good advice. Eric, I want you to take me through the political and the economic impact of this.
Well, the economic is clearly oil. It's all about oil. So I would agree with Andrew that the faster we become fully self-sufficient on our own oil drilling, fracking, et cetera, the better we will be able to not deal with these Middle Eastern conflicts anymore. Iraq, very quickly. President Obama managed to lose a war we had already won. So what do you do there now? In my opinion, I don't think we go ahead and spend another, I don't know, $500 billion, trillion to go and fix that situation. I think now you have to say, let's contain it. So what's the next step?
How do you do it?
Well, you let it play out, but if it starts to spread to other areas, then you have to get involved. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to send I don't want to send any more kids into action to die over fighting Sunnis and Shiite Muslims in a country that, frankly, even the winners hate us. That's my point there. Afghanistan, you still have time. Afghanistan, President Obama is calling for a complete pullout with the exception of a few thousand soldiers to stay there. He will lose 2 wars we've already won if he does that. So if Afghanistan, you need to keep a presence there, just like you do in Korea. North Korea doesn't go into South Korea because we have 40 or 50,000 troops there. We've done it in other places, Bosnia, etc. Keep your presence. Don't lose the second war you've already won. So there. But as far as Iraq goes, man, we blew it. He blew it.
Well, but the problem is, though, we didn't have sufficient, ground support in terms of intel on the ground in real time to see what was happening. Instead, we find out about it, on the news, essentially. But when it's too late and too much ground has been lost and given up, and I think that's a real problem because we should have maintained some presence there, and he should have pushed the point when he had the opportunity at the negotiating table. Bob?
I really don't know where to begin. First of all, the idea that we've won in Iraq and in Afghanistan is absolutely, it just defies my imagination. But even worse than that was this General Kane, whatever his name is. He said, his answer was, let's put Petraeus on an airplane. To go where? The Bahamas?
I don't think he was serious. He was just making a point of what could possibly
maybe, but still, I mean, this is the problem, that nobody has an answer to this. It is not Obama's fault that all this has come down. These people have fighting each other for 4,000 years, and this was predictable. And if you want to stop the Shiites and the Sunnis from fighting each other, then stay in there another 40 or 50 years.
But why make it easy? It appears as if President Obama is making it very easy for the radical Muslims to achieve the ultimate goal of getting the caliphate, and he just sort of tosses his hands up and going, I don't care.
By not acting in Syria at the time when the opportunity was there to contain it.
I could agree with that.
And if we had been more decisive in supporting the people on the ground there in Syria, or maybe not even supportive of them, but of making sure that ISIS didn't have a chance to grow, yes, then I do think that President Obama, and Eric's got a great point. Iraq was pacified when President Obama came in. And that changed when they decided to take out the troops, but also they didn't redouble the efforts on the political side to try to make Maliki a better leader and to at least curtail his bad instincts.
Right. We spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars training the Iraqi military to take care of themselves, which was the idea.
However, they don't have any backup, Bob.
Wait a minute. Where do you go? What would you do? How many U.S. troops would have to stand in Mosul to stop that?
At this point,
40,
you can't fix the problem with President
How many do we have in Korea, Bob? How many do we have in South Korea?
And is there an active war?
Just answer this. How many?
48,000.
Okay, so we should have pulled out of there?
From my standpoint, yes.
But look where that got
at the mercy of the North Koreans.
That's not going to. The U.S. pulling out would not do that. Anywhere would do in Japan. That was a treaty obligation we had.
Okay, here's another point of why they're making it easier very quickly. The leader of ISIS, the most radical, it's not even a terror group, it's an army, was released out of a prison in Iraq in 2009 by the Obama administration. Why? Why would you empty out prisons with dangerous criminals that are now coming back, marching, beheading people town for town, and the president's headed to golf?
How many of those people you think
like the Taliban 5 sounds familiar.
Huh?
What?
How many of those people you're fighting in there you think were released to the Bush administration? Do you think they all went home and started
possibly 40%.
making lamb chops? Huh?
Possibly 30%. That's been the rate.
Well, I mean,
3 and 10.
The whole point here is it's not putting fingers at Bush and Obama. You can't blame Obama for all this. This is a war.
Why? You blamed President Bush for everything up to this point. And even when President Obama took office, the liberals and the left and the Democrats, who, by the way, many of them voted for the war, including Hillary Clinton, and we got UN support, have been blaming President Bush even up until now. So at what point does it become President Obama's responsibility?
A 4,000-year fight between the Shiites and the Sunnis?
Bob,
you're out of your minds. Collectively, I can't believe it.
Was Iraq calm a year ago before President Obama pulled?
It was not. They didn't have a stable government. I mean,
we're going.
All right, okay. We got to go.
I hear you,
Porter.
We got to go.